Disclaimer. So although the three of us, Irene, Marco, and I, will be presenting today, it's important to highlight that we are only three of the organizations involved with this campaign as part of the Artistic Research Alliance, Culture Action Europe and ELIA, and then, of course, Michael Culture Association, and we will expound on this a bit later. But for now, let's get started. So today we will provide a brief overview of what's going on, what is the current situation. We will then move on to what is the Name Place Fund campaign, how you can get involved, and a bit of what lies ahead. So what's going on? As we are not fully aware of everybody who's in the call today, I apologize if some of this initial information might seem a bit basic. So some of you might already know it, but if you don't, I hope it's useful. Currently, we are seeing negotiations on the next multi-annual financial framework for 2028-2034. What is that? Well, that's the next long-term EU budget. It outlines the priorities and funding for the next 7 years of the European Union. It's very important, and it includes dedicated discussions and legal proposals for each of the files of the next long-term budget. There are 4 overarching headings, each with their own specificities and programs involved. For the purposes of today's session, we will be focusing on programs under heading 2. It's worth highlighting that this heading, Competitiveness, Prosperity and Security, which is roughly 30% of the proposed budget from the Commission, also includes the Agora EU program, the Future of Creative Europe. But each of these headings are really important in their own way. So let's move on to Horizon Europe. So the focus of our session today will be on 2 funding programs and their future. First, Horizon. This is, of course, the EU's main instrument for funding research and innovation in the European Union. It's been around for the best part of 40 years in different iterations, beginning with the Framework Program in 1984. If any of you hear us say FP10 today, we're referring to Framework Program 10 being the future Horizon Europe. But of course, we will also say Horizon. So as things stand in the current Horizon Europe program, we have a dedicated cluster. It's called Culture, Creativity and Inclusive Society. This is a dedicated cluster for 3 things. 1, democracy and governance. 2, culture heritage, and I think also creativity. And then lastly, for social and economic transformations. This is under what we call Pillar 2 of Horizon Europe, and it's highly successful. We have a dedicated name for culture. It's clear where you can acquire cultural funding for research and innovation, for artistic research and culture. There are annual work programs where we have specific calls that vary for culture and artistic research, and there's a clear budget in the legal proposal. These are all strengths of the current program. There are, of course, issues with every EU funding program. It's not always optimal, but let's say, generally speaking, we're pretty content. Many people across the culture and creative sectors are content with the current status quo for Horizon Europe. That's important to take into account when we look at the next budget and the long-term MFF for 2028 to 2034. Within that, it's rather different outlook for culture. So this current cluster is gone. In the EC proposal, there are still these overarching pillars, and we do have one which is on competitiveness and society. However, there is only one mention of culture and creativity within that, and it refers to a horizontal approach. There is no specific clear place or name for culture at present. In other words, even if there's some language, we cannot be for sure guaranteed that there will be a future calls and work programs dedicated to cultural funding opportunities. There is some implicit funding here, but once again, there's no designated component for culture, which raises questions for funding. So let's look at not only this Commission proposal, but also the Parliament and the Council. I'd like to emphasize I'm providing a very general overview here. If any of you have any deeper questions or wish to go into more detail, feel free to raise these later. But for those of you who are not aware, there must be an agreement struck between the European Commission, the European Parliament, and the Council in order to adopt the file for the next budget. So the Parliament and the Council's positions have also been revealed. In terms of the Parliament, which is led by the ITRE committee, they have slightly changed some of the overarching windows under this competitiveness and society pillar. But broadly speaking, it's roughly the same, let's say. There is still no designated cluster for culture, creativity, artistic research. We do have perhaps slightly strengthened language in terms of a horizontal approach to culture and creativity, but the same issues remain. There are different names, but the same issues remain. It's worth highlighting that the European Parliament has proposed a bigger budget for the future EU MFF. So they propose a 10% increase to the total budget, including a 14.3% budget increase for Horizon. That's welcomed, but what about culture? Let's look at the council. So this was released last week, the general approach, and broadly speaking, they keep the same architecture. There is still no cluster as we know it today, but there is slightly improved language because there is a dedicated paragraph on guiding societal and cultural challenges and transformation under Pillar 2. So we do have a dedicated paragraph for culture, which is an improvement, but it's still unclear how that relates to funding. There is still no culture in the name. It is a downgrade. So that's one side. However, we cannot ignore the European Competitiveness Fund. This is a new funding instrument as part of the next MFF. It was announced in January last year as part of the Competitiveness Compass. It was designated one of 5 priority areas for the Commission moving forward to try and increase European competitiveness and invest more strategically in certain sectors and technology and infrastructure. You can see here on the screen, I have the diagram that the European Commission presents for this fund because it's huge. So apart from what are called the national and regional partnership plans, this is the future of social cohesion funds, of agriculture, CAP. This is the largest fund in the next MFF. It's even larger than the dedicated window to Global Europe. So there's a lot of funding available. And obviously, we also wish to ensure there are opportunities for culture here. As things stand in the European Commission's proposal, the architecture aligns broadly with Horizon Europe. The two instruments are connected and trying to support one another. When it comes to specific references to culture, the only one in the Commission proposal is under the digital leadership window. And there are 7 different specific aspects, as you can see in this very long paragraph. I've screenshotted on the screen, and culture comes at the very end. That's all we have. Now, let's look at what the other institutions propose. It's pretty much the same. You could see on the screen, they all have 4 windows. The names change slightly, but these same principles remain. The Parliament have what they call a sustainable prosperity pillar. And there is implicit language here that culture would be covered. They have, I quote, support to the culture and creative industries, complementing Agora EU. But once again, it's unclear how this is going to work in reality. There is no designated funding for this. There is no clear work program or calls that will come. So it's not really much clearer than the Commission proposal. And likewise, when we look at the Council, it's the same scenario once again. We do have subparagraphs which recognize supporting innovation and competitiveness of the cultural and creative industries and sectors, but that's about it. So for such a huge funding instrument, which is meant to be directly tied with Horizon Europe, it faces many of the same issues we identify with Horizon. So to summarize, I know that was a lot and hopefully not too boring, but we have current negotiations on the future long-term EU budget. It's really key, and this includes the future of Horizon Europe as we know it today. Cluster 2, which many of us know very dearly, is gone at present, and there is no clear indication that it is being replaced. All we have is a few promising sentences of language, but no designated component for culture, no designated funding and guaranteed funding for culture at present. That is why we decided to launch a certain campaign, which I now pass the floor to Marco to talk about.
Thank you, Reese. I love the irony. Name Place Fund campaign. You might have seen it, and the point for us here is also to present you concretely what we've done, so that you understand where we are trying to go, where you can insert yourself, and where you can support the campaign. But first of all, what how it started. In the next slide, you can see the campaign initiator. It all started with the Artistic Research Alliance that brings together mainly most of the partners that you see on the screen, and in collaboration also with Microcultural Association, since we are very active in everything that is related to Horizon Europe, protection of cultural heritage and culture in through research and innovation. So we started discussing, and the first thing that we said was we need to raise awareness on the issue. We need to let people from the sector know what is going on so that we can act. And then immediately it evolved into something different. It evolved into concrete action at legislative level. All the things that Reese presented you, there are there are two sides of the story. The first one is the public discourse and things that people are saying in meetings and presenting members of the European Parliament saying we're going to defend culture here and etc. And then there is the legislative text where you have coordination and let's say agreement between the parties, and that is much more difficult to have culture and whatever issue insert into the legislative text. How do we achieve that? Through amendments, through conversation directly with the lawmakers. The main thing that we want to do, as the campaign says, is to name, so put culture in the title of an Horizon Europe window and a policy window, an ECF policy window. As Rhys said, the policy windows are, for the moment, in the European Competitiveness Fund, they are the windows where the competitiveness and the development should be happening in specific direction. They change name, they change scope for every institutions. They tend to have different directions. More or less, they're in that area, but there is still a discussion. So just to let you know that all these conversations that we are having for culture, cultural heritage, creativity, cultural and creative sectors and industries, we are having it on the top of a more rooted discussion, more complex discussion on how these instruments should be developed. So we are inserting ourselves in a complex structure. We're trying to have an impact, but that's the framework. So, for example, in Horizon Europe, the second pillar should be culture and global societal challenges, and we're gonna see how our campaign had an impact. The second thing is to place that the fact that culture has been expressed most of the times as an horizontal issue. Cultural heritage is an horizontal element is insufficient, because we know for sure that whenever it's horizontal, whenever it's everywhere, it's nowhere. Okay, nowhere for sure. So for certain. So we want to have an impact on this and change that, and we want to ensure a dedicated structural components both in Horizon and the ECF. So dedicated budget lines, earmarking, working programs, and dedicated calls. This comes also from the experience, mainly, for example, of the cluster 2 on culture and creativity, that has great results. So many people, so many organizations that participate in and ask for this type of money. We know also for the taux de réussite, the success rate of the last few calls, that plenty of organizations were applying to the funding of culture and creative of the cluster 2. So this means there is a demand in this sense, and this means that we need this kind of funding established. And then the fund, in terms of money, we calculated these numbers are not coming out of our heads. They're coming directly from percentages related to the already existing funding that there is in Europe for culture under research and innovation. And the percentages was translated in the current budget. And then, of course, we asked for a little bit more for what was for us mirroring the need that there is in the sector. So 5 billion for culture and cultural heritage and artistic research, roughly double the funding in the current MFF. And then for the ECF 3 billion mainstream through different policy windows that would account for 1.3% of the ECF budget proposed. Through all this, and this is a very important thing, we are trying also to recount the narrative of competitiveness, which is very market oriented, in rivalry with the other countries. What we are trying to pass through our amendments through the legislative text and the public discourse is also changing this narrative of competitiveness that should also be founded on democratic principles, social cohesion, cultural vitality, and environmental sustainability. So we should be, let's say, I'm going to say it very easily, but quickly, but the idea is that we should be the most competitive democratic area, the most competitive cultural area in that sense. And this is also achieved through embedding in the legislative text the Culture Compass and the recently signed the Joint Declaration, which are very important texts for us. And as we were saying since the beginning, these are not just texts that they are policies and the frameworks that we are beneficial for the sector, but they're also a commitment by Europe to culture and cultural heritage. This means that they should be inscribed in the legislative text, in final legislative text. So this is a overview of Cluster 2 and Digital Europe. Few things are important for me here. A lot of proposals submitted, as I was saying, and artistic research is really something specific to Cluster 2, but also the cultural heritage protection. For example, as you might know, MCA is very active in the fight against illicit trafficking of cultural goods, which is a very specific thing. But this gives you an example on how this funding can be used in so many directions, and they're very useful for our societies. And another thing, the cluster 2 is a very important cluster for social sciences and humanities. Many of you that are also present today collaborate with social sciences and humanities. They are pivotal for our actions, and we have to ensure also their presence in this type of funding. And then there is Digital Europe, which is another thing, and that now it's being incorporated in ECF. And we have, for example, I see Lorena and Harry, the data space for cultural heritage inside Digital Europe. Then we have digital capacity building in the CCS, and all this. It's unclear how it's going to be funded under the digital leadership, the new digital leadership window. Of course, there is a mention of, for example, data spaces and cloud, but it's not really established in the policy window how it should be done. For now, as Rhys was saying, there is also only a mention of culture and creative industries, which are good and should be funded. We're all part of the same sector, but they're not the only side of the medal, let's say. Steps taken so far. Our coalition represents 1,200 organizations throughout Europe. This was made by incorporating a different membership, this calculus. And as I was saying, a very concrete part of the job that we're making is that we are writing amendments for those of you who are a little bit knowledgeable in what's the structure of the legislation right now. For example, we propose a lot of amendments for FP10 on Article 15. For the ECF, we try to mainstream culture everywhere in each policy windows. This means that we had to go into the legislation bit by bit and try to place culture, for example, in the as I was saying, a culture compass and the joint declaration. In recital 2 of the ECF, we try to mention to put the mention of the culture compass. And this doesn't only happen through amendments that can be listened, but sometimes they fall on deaf ears. We want also a public awareness, so that's why the social media campaign and the info pack. This leads to our next slides that just show you one of the example of what we were trying to do. These are not just the only posts that were done. All the coalition participated, and also members from the different organizations posted there, for example, their success stories about Horizon Europe and about the wonderful things that Horizon Europe can do, but also the how culture creates a different idea of competitiveness. And this is also where we are asking you to join, but Irene will tell you a little bit more about it. For a summary, name, place, fund in Horizon and European Competitiveness Fund, which is crucial. This is something that is being done now. And Irene will show you that the final decisions for each institutions will be taken around September and October. I think that in October, the parliament will have to vote for the on the Horizon and the ECF regulation. So in plenary, in September, they will have the voting in the committee. So this is something now, if you want to join and Irene will show you, please let me stress that you have to do it now, and we are here to help you participate and we are open to collaborations. And then these amendments and the raising awareness are things that go hand in hand. There is the nitty-gritty, the amendments, but also the public discourse. We have to change it, we have to raise awareness, and we have to be compact as a sector, coherent and cohesive. Irene, that's to you to tell you a bit on what can you do.
Thank you, Marco. And it's also, we started working on this. I think the first paper from Culture Action Europe was at the end of 2024, and we've been exponentially growing this campaign also because of the urgencies that, Ries and Marco were talking about, and now really in the Name Place Fund stage, if you want to call it that way, we really want to work together with all of you and to make sure you can also kind of take away this input that we created and make it your own, and that we can all kind of push the policymakers in the same direction. So what can you do? Ways to get involved. So we have prepared a kind of guidance on 3 ways in which you could really actively participate in the campaign and help increase the pressure to the policymakers to make change. And the first is posting online. The second one is emailing or writing, connecting to the key decision makers in the trilogue negotiations, and just generally spreading the word and making sure that even more people get engaged with this campaign. So very briefly, and I'm sure my colleagues will put the info packs links in the chat. So we created the 2 documents where there's very specific kind of how-to information on how you can get engaged and do any of these 3 things. So the first one was posting online. This is really to create more public awareness and public pressure on politicians that are making decisions on Horizon Europe and the European Competitiveness Fund. We think it is very nice to have also positive narratives in this discussion, which is why one of the options that we have prepared, we really have template posts, but you can also do your own thing, of course, is sharing Horizon stories. So sharing a project that shows the value of art and culture being funded through the Horizon framework, the current Horizon framework, which immediately also gives you the evidence of why funding should be maintained in the next framework program. So this is one of the options. And the other option is to simply do an endorsement post. So we have seen both happening on social media, and I think both are very relevant and help raise the awareness around the campaign, in particular if you tag policymakers. So what we've been doing, we have been tagging the European parliamentarians who are involved in the negotiations more closely. So this is something that you could do, but you could also tag like your national people that you from the national ministries, depending on who you are closer to and who you can influence. The other thing that we've included in our information packages is various templates that you can use to email decision makers. So we have templates that can be used for the members of the European Parliament, and we also have templates that can be used for ministries of finance, so national ministries of finance and national ministries of research or higher education. These are called a bit differently in every country, but you get the gist of it. And so we have specific template letters for all of these, and you can of course also make them your own and add information that is more relevant to your specific context. But this is a starting place, I think, for you. The info packs also kind of include some information for those of you who are maybe a bit newer to lobbying about how can you go about reaching out to your national governments, for instance, or where do you find information about your national representation at the EU. So really encourage you to take a look at all this material that has been prepared there. In terms of you went slightly too quick, but like in terms of the emailing and writing to the national governments, members of the European Parliament, but also the Irish presidency of the Council, which is officially starting on the 1st of July and who will have a very big role in the negotiations. Let's say if you can do it before you go on your summer vacation, that would be great. Because everything that we still do in July will have the most impact. That said, also if you do it in autumn, so that will still be valuable. Yes, now you can go to the next slide, Reese, please. Thank you. So spread the word, make some noise. I think what I want to say here before I go more deeply into this slide is that every action that we take can be very meaningful. And maybe it's important to, if you want to support our campaign, to think where it is that you can have the most impact. So, some of our members, higher arts education institutions, I see a few of you also in the room today. I know that you're very well connected with your national your national context, and you might even know people from the ministries. So for you, maybe the most impactful action that you can still take before the summer is writing to your ministries, right? Writing to your Ministry of Finance, writing to your Ministry of Research. So use those templates. But others of you are our colleague networks in the room today, and you might be much more better positioned to reach out to the European policymakers directly, to reach out still to the members of the European Parliament and put the pressure there. So, and others of you might even be independent artists. You might have a very big network, and so use that network to spread the word. So this is kind of my maybe advice to you. If you can do only one more thing before the summer, think about where is it that I can have the most impact, and then do that. Yes, just help us create this greater visibility, make this campaign your own. Also share the info packages with your members from your own network and from your own connections that could be activated to join this campaign. Yes? Very brief kind of flagging what is coming up after the summer. So the policy timeline, I think Marco and Reese already a little bit teased this, but we are expecting in September the adoption of the draft report by the ITRE Committee on Horizon Europe and European Competitiveness Fund, and later, indeed, the final vote by the Parliament. By the end of the year, the negotiating box from the Irish presidency. So that means kind of what the priorities will be for the member states of the European Union to discuss and to make decisions on in terms of the MFF. And this is also why I'm saying if you can do things before you go on vacation, do it. But still, we need to continue the work also throughout autumn, which is why also the last info package that we created, we say, it's June to October, because after October, we can still influence this phase of the negotiations. And then we will have to see where will the trilogue negotiations be at by the end of the year, by October, November, and we will get back to you with more actions probably. In next year, then the presidency passes to Lithuania, so there might be other actions there. So I said it a little bit, so we can just work together. I'll give you the word in a second, Marco. I think right now what we can really do is still trying to put culture and artistic research on the agenda in the negotiations around Horizon Europe and the European Competitiveness Fund in between June and October 2026. We can still make a difference there. Also, I can tease that we're about to launch an open letter on behalf of the Name Place Fund campaign to the Irish presidency of the council. So this is literally, I'm waiting for the last signatures and ready to go. So today, hopefully even today, you will see it. And yes, we will, I mean, we have to see what the next step will be depending on where the negotiations end after the autumn. But definitely, we want to keep you up to date, and we will find the best ways to do it, either through another meeting like this, but also by sharing more information with you later. And I think I forgot something because Marco has his hand raised.
No, sorry, Irene. It's not you, it's me who forgot something to say very important, and it's a good way also to close this presentation. We actually have two successes, two achievements with this campaign, and I think it's they're small ones. No, one is bigger than and one is smaller, but they are representative of the fact that we can have an impact. The first one is the council position that has been that was voted and that has been discussed. This was something that was leaked at one point. We saw that culture was put back in the second pillar, and then the last version that was voted, it was really even strengthened, which is good because we know that the cultural ministries that we contacted and tried to contact their finance ministries, and there was, let's say, something that happens. Something more can even happen, but that's up to the future and that's up to us. And the second thing is on the parliament side, we saw that the amendments that we proposed were flowed directly in the amendments proposals of specific MEPs. These MEPs are specifically left-leaning parties, because let's not hide it, these left-leaning parties, they tend to have more ears for the type of things that we're discussing here right now, and a different type of competitiveness also. I mean, there's a political reality also. This doesn't mean that we should stop ourselves to left-leaning parties. They should all be on board, but that's already a signal that we are being listened by policymakers and lawmakers. That's it.